During last year's Invictus launch week, I released this poster which attempted to catalogue all of the UEE ship names and work out what their naming conventions were if they weren't already known. Every UEE ship class has mostly kept to a single naming convention or a convention that's based upon the generations of ships. And so it's quite fun to sort of work out other names. Now, most our system players will keep their chosen ship names quite close to their chest because not every ship name is available to use at the moment. Not every ship can be named yet, and you don't want someone else taking your well-chosen name. However, I'm not much of a military ship guy, so I thought it'd be interesting to just go through all the military ships, discuss their naming conventions in lore, give you some examples of other names that would be good names that you might want to choose for your ship, and talk about my favourite pick. Now, those favourite picks will be very personal, so probably won't be the ones that you'll want to use, but I think should give you the idea of the conventions and a good way to sort of explore your names. Now, before we get launched into it, we need to talk about prefixes. All UEE ships have a prefix of UEES, which just means UEE ship. Similarly, the UNE ships were called UNES, and UPE ships were called UPES. Now, to use that prefix on your ship name would mean imitating the NPC Navy, which isn't very lore-friendly, and I'm trying to talk about lore-friendly names, but also might fall foul of CIG's own rules against NPC imitation. Now, following the same general naming conventions for the actual ship name without a prefix is preferred because it could imply that it's a decommissioned military ship, or it could just mean that you're trying to keep up the traditions of the Navy through your own privately owned ship. So this is kind of for that little niche of people who want to sort of follow the general traditions of the Navy without imitating them. So we'll start small and work large, and we're going to start with the smallest UEE Navy ships that actually receive official names, and that's the Hammerheads. The Hammerheads have 4 different generations with different conventions, with only the first being just fish, so that's where you get the Hammerhead from. But then the current generation, Flight 4, are all water deities. So the 2 examples we have in lore are the Enyo and the Nefeli. Now, so therefore you can pick any deity from your chosen mythology which has a strong association with water, such as Kukulkan from Mayan mythology, Tiamat, which is Mesopotamian mother goddess associated with rivers, and Sobek, crocodile god of the Nile. These are all, I think, would be really cool names for a Hammerhead, and which all kind of carry on that theme. My personal pick would be a water deity that's kind of very specific to the south of England. Sulis was the god associated with the hot springs at Bath, and who the Romans then syncretized with their goddess Minerva to give us Sulis Minerva. And that Roman site is a big kind of is a big part of my childhood growing up in the south of England, visiting it, and I think it's a fascinating site. So if I was to choose a water deity to name my Hammerhead after, I'd go for Sulis. Moving to the Perseus, and this is, I think, a very interesting theme of culture heroes. So the examples they have from Greek mythology are Perseus and Achilles, and then there's Arash and Bunjil, who are from Persian and I think Indian mythologies. So a culture hero is a mythological figure who either very much embodies the values of the culture, so in the way that Achilles does as like the ultimate Greek warrior, or sort of advances culture in some way, usually by tricking the gods. So Prometheus is kind of embodies some of these ideas, having stolen fire for the humans. So examples of good names for this would be Anansi, who's Ashanti West African mythology, Maui, who as well as all the other things you might know about Maui, is supposed to have actually raised the lands of the Polynesian islands, and Beowulf, who is from the oldest work of English literature. But my pick would be Beavis. Now, that's obviously a strange name for a ship, not associating it with Beavis and Butthead. Beavis is a knightly culture hero-esque figure, very much in the sort of King Arthur vein, specifically from my hometown of Southampton. And part of the town is named after him. His magical sword is supposed to be buried under one of the towers. And so it's a very kind of rooted in my upbringing name, but that embodies this culture hero idea. So you could maybe think about researching local heroes from your area, from the local myths, to name your Perseus. Now, the Polaris is a slightly misleading one because it might seem that it's named after a star, but it's actually named after an in-law military figure, Hester Polaris, who was a hero from the First Tavaran War. That's the only one we know about in lore, is the first ship of the class, UES Polaris, but we might assume that other future ones would be named after in-law military figures. So here's 3 examples. Riley was the person who led Squadron 42 in the early 2900s. Dunleavy, who made Squadron 42 famous at the Battle of Suntory, which is a great story you should have a look at. And Perry, Armistead Perry, was the admiral who set up the Perry Line, the no man's land zone with the Xi'an Empire, and probably averted war. Now, my choice is a bit more obscure, but I think that this is one that probably other people might want to steal, is Shaw. Now, one of the darkest periods of the Tavaran Wars was when the planet of Idris IV was taken, and there was a resistance. It was taken by the Tavaran, and there was a resistance movement, sort of like the French resistance or the Polish resistance, called the Greys. And this was run by Rachel Locke, who fought so bravely that after the war, the planet was actually named after her, and it's now called Locke. Her second in command was Alana Shaw, and who was publicly executed by the Tavaran. So I think that would be a really good military figure to name a Polaris after, because much like Hester Polaris, sort of embodies those martial values of the UEE, and also the self-sacrificing angle that is also present in Hester Polaris' story. Now, the Idris is a somewhat easier one. Most of the Idrises we know about have been shared a name with systems of the UEE. So we know about the UES Idris, which is actually, again, named after the Battle of Idris IV. And then we know about the Stanton, which is in Squadron 42. And there's also been reference to a UES Banshee. So you can kind of pick your favourite UEE system, but you might want to pick ones that have a strong association with the military. So, for example, Magnus, which is a former naval base but is now home to Drake. Killian, which is where you'll find Navy HQ. And Davian isn't a Navy base, but is where Aegis come from, and is also where we had first contact with the Banu. Now, my pick for this would be actually Kiel. Kiel was a major naval base, and on the Perry Line, well, near the Perry Line, so it's sort of a very forward base for the Xi'an Cold War. It's obviously, therefore, kind of not as important now, but has gone through a sort of regeneration, particularly on its main planet Severus, and that's where the Intergalactic Aerospace Expo is both from and held every year. But you can really pick any, you could probably pick any system you like, and in a cosplay I did before, I actually made up patches for a UES Raitor, which was implied to be an Idris class vessel. Javelin is one that I think anyone will have a bit of fun with because it's just weapons. So we've got the first ship of the class of Javelin. You've all probably explored the UES Warhammer, which tours during Invictus. You might have explored the crashed UES Fleiser, and there's also reference to the Gauntlet, which is in Squadron 42. There's also in lore a Cestus and a Tomahawk, which aren't necessarily confirmed to be Idris's, but are kind of would fit that description. So you can really just pick any weapon that you like. I think some particularly good ones would be like Falcon, Maul, or perhaps if you were Sikh, you might choose Kirpan, because that's, that if you're not aware, that's the ceremonial weapon carried by Sikhs. My personal choice would be a mix of interesting weapons and also kind of carrying on this theme of cultural reference, Perseus, which is associated with both Vikings and with Anglo-Saxons, but has sort of survived in a weird form in British heraldry, and is mostly associated with areas like Middlesex and Wessex. So it's, I think, an interesting crossover thing between actual weapons and heraldic history of Britain. Now, Pegasus is a fairly easy one to name. We know that there was, it's implied that there was a UES Pegasus, and we know that in Squadron 42 there's a UES Chimera, and both of those are from Greek mythology. So you can kind of just pick your own mythical animals here. If you want to stay with Greek, you go for, say, the Hydra or the Manticore. I think an interesting one from Slavic mythology that would fit here would be like the Leshy. Unfortunately, most, I can't really continue my theme of using British references here, because most of the interesting names of British animals have been sort of taken and used by the Harry Potter universe, and so would just seem like Harry Potter references. But one thing which at least has different implications is the kobold, which is from British mythology. That's kind of, I think, got different connotations that wouldn't be too bad. But for my own one, if I were to have a Pegasus or were to be naming a Pegasus, I'd call it Charybdis, which is another from Greek mythology. But also, if your org has a Scylla, so Charybdis and Scylla are these two paired whirlpool monsters that are supposed to haunt the area between Italy and Sicily, and it's very difficult to go between them, and to be between Charybdis and Scylla is like being between a rock and a hard place. But I think Charybdis is just a great name for, it's fun to write, it's fun to say, so I think that would be a good name for a Pegasus. And so moving on to the largest ship that players will ever potentially get their hands on, as far as we know, the Bengal. They're continuing a theme from Chris Roberts' earlier games of being named after cats, and it's implied that we'd have the first ship of the class, the Bengal, which is a type of tiger, it's a subspecies of tiger. You've seen the Barbary is the one that tours around Invictus, and that was not a subspecies, but rather a population of lions on the Barbary coast. And there's also the Krigeri, which is a subspecies of lion, and that is a Squadron 42 ship. So you can kind of pick your favourite big cat, but I think that you could go more interesting than just going, panther and lion and whatever. You could say another big cat like the ocelot, or you could go into non-English and scientific, i.e. Greek and Latin names, and look for names like, I think Hulin would be a great name for a Bengal, which is the Manchurian name for Siberian tigers and literally means the king. I think that would be a great name for the Bengal. Also, another good one would be Oskolo, which is the Quechua name for the Andean mountain cat. Sounds a bit cooler than Andean mountain cat. But I was going to name a Bengal. I'd name it Sabertooth. It's not the most obscure one, but I think it's interesting. It embodies my interest in paleontology from my work, and I mean there's probably the Bengals are probably extinct too by now. So why shouldn't we pick extinct big cats? And finally, the big daddy, the Retribution. Now, there's only one ship of this class, the UES Retribution. I think it said that they're building some more, though. And if we were to take Retribution as a theme, it would be like Payback. But I'm extrapolating from one data point there. So you could call it Redemption, Vengeance, Reckoning. Those would all be reasonable names for them. If I were to be naming a Retribution, I might go for something like Revanche. Now, any French speakers are just going to go, well, that just means revenge. It's just the same in French. But in English, revanche and revanchism have political meaning. Revanchists are people who feel wronged by another country, particularly one that's taken their land, and want to invade and get that land back and take revenge on the country that took it. And I think that very much embodies how the UEE feels about the Van Duel at this point. Finally, I just wanted to talk about the largest military ship that I do own, the Anvil Carrack, which is actually the largest ship that we know of at the moment in the military that doesn't get a name. Maybe because it's a non-frontline ship, but they just get a serial number. And that number is constructed from either R or S, depending on their research or survey, then -1 for their size, and then their serial number. So if you were trying to write a backstory for a Carrack and it was a military ship, or it used to be a military ship, you could factor a serial number into its past, and it might be something like S12463, saying it's the 2463rd survey vessel produced, something like that. My Carrack's actually called the Sanyo-sen, the ship with no name, which is in Xi'an, because the Xi'an name I picked didn't fit with the naming rules that we were on punctuation. So for the time being, it's called the Sanyo-sen, which is a little bit of a joke. I hope you enjoyed this video, just rattling on about ship naming conventions, and thanks for watching. Check out some of my other videos, consider subscribing, and let me know in the comments what you think about your favourite picks for these ships, or anything else which you think I've missed. Thanks very much, and see you around the verse.